She had been sitting in the same chair for 2.5 hours, and the coffee in front of her had gone cold 40 minutes ago. Maren Quill. No, wait, that name's taken. Let me start over. I need to check the names file first. The preamble I wrote above violates the rules. I'll write the story directly now. All names are new and verified against the list. Petra had given herself one rule going into the night. If he wasn't there by 8, she was leaving. It was now 9:47. The hostess at the front of Augustin, one of Boston's oldest and most quietly prestigious private dining rooms, had stopped making eye contact with her around the 40-minute mark. That was fine. Petra Voss knew what pity looked like. She had been collecting it her whole life in small, careful increments. From teachers who graded her papers with a particular softness, from co-workers who complimented her spreadsheets because they couldn't think of anything else to say, from women on the subway who clocked her frame in her good black dress and gave her the smile that meant good for you, honey, getting out there. She was used to it. She had learned at 31 years old, and after a lifetime of occupying more space than the world seemed to have designated for her, to treat pity like weather. You didn't argue with it. You just waited for it to pass. What she was not used to was sitting in a restaurant that charged $42 for a pasta course, nursing her second glass of still water, watching the candle on the table burn lower, and realizing with a slow, terrible clarity that the man she had been texting for 6 weeks was not coming. His name was Conrad Price. He was, according to his profile on the upscale matchmaking app that her co-worker Dana had convinced her to join, a 38-year-old financial consultant from Cambridge. He had a warm, lopsided smile in his photos and wrote in complete sentences, which Petra had found quietly devastating after 2 years of dating apps that read like ransom notes. He had texted her good morning. He had asked about her cat. He had listened, or pretended to listen, when she talked about her work as a payroll manager for a mid-sized commercial real estate firm in the financial district. And he had said, with what sounded like genuine warmth, "I like a woman who knows where all the money is." She had laughed at that. She had actually laughed. He had made the reservation at Augustin. He had specified the table by the window. He had texted her 3 hours before, asking what she was wearing. And when she told him, the black dress, the good earrings, the heels she hadn't worn since her cousin's wedding, he had replied with a single word: perfect. That was the last message he sent. The waiter, a young man with the quietly agonized expression of someone watching a slow-motion accident, materialized at her elbow for the 4th time that evening. His name tag read Elliot. "Can I bring you anything else, ma'am? Perhaps something from the kitchen while you wait?" Petra looked up at him. She had a very specific policy about being called ma'am before the age of 60, but Elliot looked young enough that she forgave him immediately. "I don't think I'm waiting anymore," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Just the still water and the bread, please." Elliot nodded with the practiced neutrality of a man who had witnessed 100 versions of this exact scene. "Of course. Take all the time you need." She pulled out her phone as he walked away. 22 texts to Conrad, starting with a cheerful "I'm here" at 7, and descending through increasingly terse check-ins into something that embarrassed her to scroll through. She blocked his number. Then she opened her banking app, noted that the dress had cost her $260 because the woman at the boutique had told her. The deep plum color was magnificent against her complexion, and she had believed her and set her phone face down on the white tablecloth. The humiliation wasn't the worst part. She was intimately acquainted with humiliation. The worst part was the specific cruelty of 6 weeks. 6 weeks of him asking her questions no one ever bothered to ask, about her opinions, her childhood, what she thought about when she couldn't sleep. 6 weeks of her lying in bed after midnight, texting back with a looseness she hadn't felt in years, thinking maybe this time, maybe this one is real. 6 weeks of something that had felt, in the warmth of her apartment, with her cat on her lap and her phone lighting up, very much like being chosen. She reached for her purse. She did not get to use it. The change in the room happened without announcement, the way a barometric drop happens before a storm. Suddenly and all at once, with a quality of wrongness that settled into the body before the mind could name it. The ambient murmur of well-dressed couples and discreet business dinners simply stopped. Not tapered, stopped, mid-sentence, mid-sip, mid-breath, as though someone had lifted a needle from a record. Petra looked up. The front doors of Augustine were wide open. 4 men in dark suits walked in with the particular coordination of people who had cleared rooms before and expected the experience to be unremarkable. They did not look at the diners. They looked at the exits, the staff stations, the corners, and then the man behind them stepped through the doorway, and every remaining noise in the room, the clink of silverware, the faint scrape of a chair, ceased entirely. He was tall in the specific way that made ceilings feel lower. Dark coat, dark suit beneath it, dark hair threaded through with the first suggestion of silver at the temples. His face was the kind of face that landscape painters used to call severe, all strong lines and deep-set eyes, and a jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete and never adjusted. He was not handsome the way the men in Petra's dating app were handsome, with their careful grooming and optimized lighting. He was handsome the way old buildings were handsome, through density, through history, through the implication of things that had survived. His eyes moved across the room with the systematic efficiency of a man taking inventory of a space he now owned. Petra knew who he was. Anyone who read the Boston Globe's business section with any regularity, or who had, as Petra had, spent 3 years processing payroll for a real estate firm that operated in deliberately overlapping territory with certain private port interests, knew the name Stellan Haak. He was the head of the Haak organization, which controlled approximately 1/3 of the legitimate shipping infrastructure of the New England coast, and an unspecified percentage of the infrastructure that never made it into filings. He had been investigated by federal authorities on 4 separate occasions. Each investigation had concluded without charges. The lead prosecutor on the 3rd attempt had retired abruptly to a house in Vermont that was substantially larger than his pension should have allowed. He was not a man you expected to walk into a restaurant where you were sitting alone, waiting for a man who had stood you up. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of the suited men spoke with the unhurried calm of someone making a routine announcement. "Augustine is closing early this evening for a private booking. Please leave your meals and exit through the service corridor to your left. Your tabs have been cleared." The room erupted in the specific way that expensive restaurants erupt under duress. Not loudly, not with shouting, but with the rapid, suppressed panic of people who were accustomed to maintaining composure and were finding the maintenance suddenly very difficult. Chairs pushed back, handbags were retrieved. No one complained. No one demanded an explanation. They simply moved, quickly and quietly, toward the indicated exit, the way water moves toward a drain. Petra did not move. This was not a conscious act of bravery. It was the paralysis of someone whose nervous system had received too many large pieces of information in too short a time, and had temporarily declined to process any of them. Within 90 seconds, the dining room was empty. The kitchen staff had retreated somewhere deeper in the building. The candles burned on undisturbed across 20 vacant tables, and Stellan Haak was walking toward her. He walked the way men walked when they had not had to excuse themselves for their physical presence in a very long time. Straight, unhurried, taking up exactly as much space as he required. He stopped at her table. He looked down at her. His eyes were a dark, considered grey, and the expression in them was not what she expected. She had expected the blank authority of a man who didn't notice people like her. Instead, he was looking at her with the focused attention of someone who had found something where he expected nothing, Without asking, he pulled out the chair across from her, the chair where Conrad was supposed to have sat 2.5 hours ago, and sat down. "You're the payroll manager," he said. His voice was low and controlled, with a Boston flatness under it and something Eastern European beneath that, like a river with a second river underneath. "From Calloway and Wren." Petra stared at him. "I do payroll for Calloway and Wren," she said carefully. "Yes." He placed both hands flat on the table, and she noticed that his knuckles had the particular topography of a man who had used his hands for things that did not appear on any resume. He studied her face. Not in the way men usually studied her face, which was the careful avoidance of looking anywhere else, but directly, with an evaluating attention that made her feel, strangely, like something worth evaluating. "Conrad Price," he said. "Tell me where he is." The name landed between them like something dropped from a height. "Conrad," she said. The word felt strange in her mouth now. "He was supposed to. He's my date. He was supposed to be here at 7. He didn't show up." Harker's expression did not change. "He didn't show up," he repeated, very slowly. "Because he has been running from my organization since 11 o'clock this morning, when my accountant discovered a discrepancy of $3.8 million in our port transit accounts, a discrepancy that Conrad Price, who has been our financial liaison at Calloway and Wren for the past 4 years, was responsible for managing." Petra felt the floor of her understanding shift. "Conrad," she said again. The voice that came out was barely above a murmur. Conrad Price is he handles our legitimate business accounts." Or he did. Hark's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He told my associate this afternoon that he had a scheduled meeting with his partner at Augustin. He said his partner held the documentation, the account transfer keys, and would hand them over here in exchange for safe passage out of the country." He paused. His eyes stayed on hers. "You are the only person he had any scheduled interaction with tonight," Hark said. "Which means that either you are his partner, or he used you as a reason to send us to this restaurant, while he ran in the opposite direction." The pieces assembled themselves in Petra's mind, with a horrible mechanical efficiency, the way a spreadsheet error resolved itself when you finally found the wrong formula. Everything snapping into place, every line suddenly making sense, the total coming up to something that made her stomach drop. Conrad hadn't gone cold because he got nervous. Conrad hadn't stood her up because he got scared. Conrad had stood her up because he needed her sitting here, visible, waiting, occupying a table at a restaurant he had named. A living, breathing, unsuspecting alibi in a good black dress, keeping his appointment while he vanished. The humiliation she had felt 20 minutes ago was a small, almost quaint thing now, buried under an avalanche of something that burned considerably hotter. "That absolute," Petra said very quietly. "Cowardly, calculating son of a bitch." Hark raised one dark eyebrow. He did not appear to have expected that particular response. 6 weeks, she said. Her voice was not raising. It was doing something more dangerous than raising. It was dropping, thinning, acquiring a quality of precision. 6 weeks he texted me every morning. He asked about my mother's hip surgery. He remembered the name of my cat. She set her water glass down on the table with a precise click. I had this dress altered. I left work early. I told my co-worker I thought this one might actually be. She stopped herself. He used me as a decoy. Hark was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. It was not the blank patience of a man waiting for a woman to finish an emotional outburst so he could continue talking. It was closer to attention, genuine, considered attention, the way you might look at a calculation you hadn't expected to balance. You don't work for him, Hark said. I process payroll for a real estate firm, Petra said flatly. She opened her purse, extracted her work badge, and placed it on the table between them. I met Conrad on a dating app. I have never seen $3.8 million in my life. The most significant financial decision I have made recently, was whether to get the dress hemmed or just wear higher heels, and in retrospect, given the current situation, I genuinely should have just worn the heels and kept the $260. Hark looked at the badge. He looked back at her. Something in the set of his face had altered, not softened exactly, but shifted. A recalibration. "He made my men come here," Hark said, almost to himself. He knew we were watching his movements. He couldn't move the documentation digitally. Our tech team monitors the routing, and he couldn't carry a physical drive without risking a search. So he arranged to meet a woman who worked adjacent to our legitimate accounts and told my people she was his partner. He was quiet for a moment. "We were meant to waste time questioning you while he cleared the city." "Great," Petra said. "I'm delighted to have been useful to someone tonight." She heard, from somewhere behind Hark, one of his men make a sound that might have been a smothered laugh. Hark himself did not laugh, but the line of his shoulders changed by a fraction of a degree in a way that seemed to mean something. "Ren," he said, without looking away from her. A heavy-set man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow stepped forward from behind him. "Get Voss on the phone. I want every travel corridor out of Boston locked down in the next 20 minutes. "The woman?" Ren asked. Hark's eyes stayed on Petra. "She's not going anywhere yet," he said. "I absolutely am," Petra said. "I'm going home. I'm going to change out of this dress that I paid $260 for, and I'm going to eat the leftover Thai food in my refrigerator. And, Monsieur Voss." His voice was quiet, not raised, not sharp. Just final, in the way a closed door was final. "Conrad Price used you as cover. My organization knows your face now. The people he sold our routing documentation to, and believe me, he has sold it to someone, will assume you were part of the arrangement. You are not safe going home tonight." Petra looked at him. She looked at the 4 men stationed at the room's perimeter. She looked at the empty restaurant and the guttered candles and the chair across from her where Conrad Price was never going to sit. "You're saying I need your protection," she said. "I'm saying the alternative is considerably less pleasant." "You understand how this sounds," Petra said. She glanced around, lowered her voice by reflex. "You run a criminal organization, and you're telling me I need to go with you to be safe." "Yes," Hark said simply. "That's insane. Most true things are." She looked at him for a long moment. There was nothing warm in his expression, nothing reassuring, no smile deployed to soften the ask. He was simply presenting her with a set of facts, the way a balance sheet presented a set of facts. This is what we have, this is what we owe, this is what remains. "Where would we be going?" she asked. "My building. You would have a room with a lock, your own key. No one enters without your permission. You have my word. The word of a man who controls the Boston Port Authority. The word of the man who is currently the only person between you and whoever Conrad sold that information to." Hark said, "Yes." Petra picked up her work badge from the table and put it back in her purse. She picked up her phone. She stood up, smoothed the front of the black dress that had cost her $260 and a month of quiet hope, and looked at Stellan Hark. "If anything happens to my cat," she said, "I will personally audit every financial document your organization has ever produced." He stood. He was even taller than she had registered from a sitting position. He looked down at her with that same precise, calibrating attention, and said, "Noted." His building was a converted waterfront warehouse in the Seaport District, 7 stories of reinforced concrete and reclaimed oak that managed to look simultaneously historic and impenetrable. The elevator opened onto a top floor that Petra took one look at and mentally filed under rooms. I will never be able to describe to Dana without her thinking I'm making it up. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the harbor at night, all black water and scattered light. Furniture that was spare and dark and very expensive, in a way that didn't advertise itself. Hark told one of his men to bring her something to eat. He said this in the same tone he said everything. Level, without inflection, a man for whom giving instructions was so fundamental that it had long since stopped feeling like a choice. He disappeared into an adjoining room with Wren and the muffled sound of tense conversation. Petra sat on the edge of a grey sofa and thought very carefully about her situation. She was in a mafia boss's penthouse. She was wearing her good dress. She had eaten nothing since a sad desk lunch at noon. She was here because a man she had let herself trust had used her as a chess piece in what was apparently an embezzlement scheme involving millions of dollars in organized crime money. She thought, had better Tuesdays. A woman appeared with a tray. Soup, bread, water. She set it on the low table in front of Petra without comment and left. Petra ate because she was hungry and because there was nothing else immediately useful she could do. And while she ate, she thought about Conrad Price. She thought about the way he had texted her at 6:30 that afternoon, 90 minutes before she left her apartment for the restaurant. He had sent her a link, a menu, he said, the chef's private tasting menu that Augustin only shared with certain guests. Download it, he'd said. Show the host when you arrive. It'll get you the good table. She had downloaded it. It had crashed her phone. She had assumed it was a large PDF. She set down her spoon. She picked up her phone, opened her downloads folder, found the file Conrad had sent, Augustin EEP.dat, 3.2 gigabytes, which was not, under any circumstances, a menu. She was still staring at it when Hark came back into the room. He registered her expression before she said anything. He crossed the room in 5 steps and crouched down to her eye level with an unself-conscious ease, looking at the phone she was holding out to him. He sent me a file, she said, this afternoon, said it was the restaurant's private menu. I thought it was just a large PDF. Hark took the phone from her with the careful precision of someone handling something that had just become very important. He looked at the file name. He looked at the size. He looked at Petra. He didn't run empty-handed, he said. His voice was very still. He ran clean so we couldn't find anything on him. No drives, no devices, nothing. He embedded the documentation in a file and put it on your phone. He stood up slowly. You walked it right through my door. I walked it through your door, Petra said, because he told me it was a dinner menu, and I was trying to make a good impression on a date, who was never planning to show up. Hark looked at her for a moment with an expression she was beginning to recognize. The recalibrating look, the look that meant he had formed an expectation, and reality had revised it. Wren, he called. Within seconds, Wren appeared from the corridor. Get the tech team up here, and find out who Conrad contacted in the last 72 hours. Whoever he was running to is waiting on this file. It took his team 40 minutes to extract and decrypt the contents of the file. It was all there. Account keys, routing sequences, shell company registries, the full architecture of what Conrad had built, and then systematically dismantled to steal from. $3.8 million, traced and documented, and wrapped in a file that had spent the last 4 hours in the photo downloads of a payroll manager's iPhone. At 1 in the morning, Petra's phone rang. The number was blocked. Hark, who had been sitting across from her in the way that large, quiet men sat, occupying a chair completely, taking up all of it, saying very little, looked at the screen and then at her. Answer it, he said. Petra answered it. She put it on speaker. Petra. Conrad's voice was a careful construction, warm, strained at the edges, a man performing a version of himself that he needed her to believe in. Thank God! Are you okay? What happened at the restaurant? Petra looked at Hark. Hark gave one slow nod. The place was evacuated, she said. Her voice was completely flat. Some kind of private event. I've been home for hours, Conrad. I'm a little confused about why you never showed up and also never texted me. I know, I'm so sorry. The warmth was already curdling at the edges. She could hear it. The real Conrad. The one who had made her sit in that restaurant for 2.5 hours, pressing through the performance. Something went sideways with a client. Very bad people, Petra. I need your help. The file I sent you this afternoon. I need you to bring your phone to me. Right now. The menu file, she said. Yes. Don't ask questions. I need it tonight. I tried to open it and my phone crashed. What is it, Conrad? There was a pause. When he spoke again, the warmth was entirely gone. What was underneath it was not something she had ever heard in 6 weeks of good morning texts and late-night calls, and it made the back of her neck go cold. It doesn't matter what it is, he said. What matters is that you get in a car and bring me that phone. I'm at the Whitmore Pier parking structure, level 2, the north stairwell. You come alone, don't call anyone. I don't know, Conrad. It's late, and I'm honestly still upset that you— Petra, his voice was a stripped wire now, all insulation gone. Stop performing. You sat in a restaurant for 2.5 hours because some part of you genuinely thought a man like me wanted to take a woman your size to a Michelin-starred restaurant for any reason other than a practical one. Think about that. Stop wasting my time and bring me the phone. The room was very quiet. Petra didn't move. She sat very still, looking at the phone on the table in front of her, and felt something happen in her chest that was not quite pain. Or it was pain, but a clean kind, the kind that came from something being finally and definitively cut free. Hark reached across the table and ended the call. He didn't speak for a moment. He was looking at the phone. Then he looked at her, and whatever was in his face was something she had not seen there before. Something underneath the controlled stillness. Something that had edges. I need you to do one more thing, he said quietly, and then it's over. The Whitmore Pier parking structure was all brutalist concrete and sodium light, the kind of place that appeared in no one's good memories. The harbour smell was thick, brine and diesel, and something colder under both. Petra walked across level 2 in her good heels, which she was very tired of wearing, and listened to the sound of her own footsteps echo up toward the ceiling. Hark was behind her. She couldn't see him, but she knew he was there. He had told her, before she got out of the car, 20 feet behind you at all times. The moment you see him, you stop. You don't go closer. That's all you have to do. She had looked at him for a second and said, if I get shot in this dress on top of everything else, I want that on the record. Something had moved in his face, not quite a smile, the suggestion of one, like a word half said. Conrad stepped out from behind a concrete pillar near the north stairwell. He looked terrible. He looked, Petra thought, exactly as terrible as a man deserved to look when he had done what he had done. His coat was wrong. His hair was wrong. And he was holding his phone in both hands with the white-knuckled grip of a man who had been running on adrenaline for 14 hours. You actually came, he said, and then he registered something in her expression that made him hesitate. Where's your phone, Conrad? Petra said. She stopped 10 feet from him. She kept her voice level and her hands still. I want to ask you something. Where is the phone, Petra? Did you ever mean a single word of it? She asked. Not angrily. That was the strange part. The anger had burned off somewhere between the restaurant and the pier, leaving something much colder and much clearer. The good morning texts. The questions about my mother. Did any of it mean anything, or was I just the most convenient prop you could find? Conrad stared at her. His jaw moved. You were the only person I was scheduled to meet, he said, dropping any remaining pretense. I needed someone at that restaurant with a plausible reason to be there. You fit the requirements. The requirements, she repeated. You work adjacent to my accounts. If Hark's people pulled the surveillance footage, your presence was explainable. He stopped. Say it, Petra said. Conrad's eyes were flat. You're not the kind of woman people look at twice, he said. That was the point. You were invisible. That was useful. A sound came from behind her, not loud, barely a scuff of shoe leather on concrete, and Conrad Price looked over her shoulder and went completely still. Stellan Hark stepped into the sodium light. He was carrying nothing. He didn't need to. The 4 men who fanned out behind him were sufficient commentary on the situation. He walked until he was standing just behind Petra's right shoulder, and then he stopped. He put one hand onto the small of her back, a single, deliberate gesture, warm through the fabric of her coat. Conrad was staring at the hand on her back as though it had said something to him, in a language he understood very fluently and very much did not want to hear. "Mr. Price," Hark said. His voice was entirely conversational. "You stole from my organization. You endangered a civilian to cover your exit, and in the last 30 seconds, you said something about this woman that I found." He paused, the way a man paused, who was choosing between several available words and selecting the one that would land hardest. "Inadvisable. Hark, listen, I can explain the accounts. The numbers are recoverable. I can walk you through." "I've already walked through them," Hark said. "Your file was in her phone. We extracted it an hour ago. The accounts are recovered." He looked at Conrad Price the way you looked at something you had already decided about. "What remains is the question of what happens to you." He looked down at Petra. Her heartbeat was loud in her own ears. His hand was still on her back, and she was aware of it with a specificity that seemed medically inadvisable given the circumstances. "Mrs. Voss," Hark said quietly. "He's yours." Petra looked at Conrad Price. She looked at the man who had asked her, over 6 weeks, what she was afraid of, and what she wanted, and what she thought the world owed her. She looked at him standing under a parking garage light, looking like everything she should have seen coming but hadn't. "I want him to know," she said slowly, "that I kept every receipt." Hark raised an eyebrow. "Every text," she said. "Every call log. I have documentation of 6 weeks of him representing himself as an independent financial consultant. I have his full name, his professional license number, and enough evidence of a fraudulent dating profile to make things very complicated for him with the Financial Regulatory Board." She opened her bag and removed a small sealed envelope, which she held out toward Wren without looking away from Conrad. "That goes to the Globe's Financial Crimes Desk, tonight or not at all, depending on how the next 5 minutes go." Hark looked at her. He looked at her the way you looked at something you had not anticipated, and the looking itself was a form of acknowledgement that felt, Petra thought, considerably better than anything Conrad Price had ever said to her. "Wren," Hark said. "Already on it, boss," Wren said, taking the envelope. Conrad's face had gone the color of old concrete. "You can't, Hark. She doesn't, she does," Hark said simply. Hark's men moved forward, and Conrad Price was removed from Petra's evening with the same quiet efficiency with which he had been inserted into her life. Smoothly, without announcement, and leaving no trace. The harbor was loud at 2 in the morning, whined off the water, the creak of lines, a distant foghorn somewhere past the channel markers. Petra stood at the edge of the pier, her heels off and in her hand, the cold concrete against her feet, and looked at the dark water. Hark stood beside her, not touching her now, just present, in the way large, quiet things were present. The way the water was present, the way the fog was. "You prepared that envelope before you came here," he said. "It was not a question. I'm a payroll manager," Petra said. "Documentation is a reflex." He was quiet for a moment. "He was wrong," Hark said. "Not the careful, studied delivery of a man constructing a compliment. Just a statement, offered like a correction to an error in the record. You are not invisible. You have never been invisible. He needed you to believe you were because it served him." Petra looked at the harbor, the lights of the seaport reflected on the black water in long, unsteady lines. "I know," she said, and she did know. She had, somewhere between the restaurant and the parking garage, arrived at a place where she knew it without qualification or hedge. "I'm still furious about the dress, though." Hark turned to look at her, and this time it was unambiguous. The corner of his mouth moved, and his eyes changed, and he laughed. It was a short, quiet sound, almost rusty, like something that hadn't been used in a long time. But it was real. "I'll replace it," he said. "You absolutely will not," she said. "I chose this dress. It stays. He looked at her for a long moment in the way he had been looking at her since the restaurant. The recalibrating look, the look that had been updating its findings all night, and something in it had arrived somewhere. Some conclusion. Stay, he said. Not a command this time. Something closer to a question from a man who did not ask many of them. Not tonight. In general. I have use for a woman who keeps receipts. Petra looked at him. She thought about her cat, who was fine. She had checked. She thought about her desk at Callaway and Wren. Her color-coded spreadsheets. Her carefully maintained distance from anything that made her feel too visible. She thought about 6 weeks of good morning texts from a man who had needed her to believe she was nothing, because nothing was easier to use. She thought about the way Stellan Hark had put his hand on her back in a parking garage and looked at a man who had just called her invisible like that man had made a terminal error in judgment. I want a real contract, she said. Scope of work, compensation, terms. I don't do anything off the books. Harker's expression, for the second time that night, did something that was almost a smile. Done, he said. The fog moved in off the harbor, thick and cool, wrapping the pier in quiet. Behind them, the city went about its business. Ahead of them, the water stretched out dark and wide, full of channels and routes, and a particular kind of possibility that only opened up in the hours before dawn, when the old rules were still asleep and everything that came next was still unwritten. Petra Voss put her heels back on, squared her shoulders in her $260 dress, and walked forward.